A chilling, calculated betrayal. A quiet, heart-wrenching disappearance. And 5 years later, a startling return with two tiny, undeniable truths in tow. What happens when the world's most admired man is forced to confront the life he abandoned? A life now embodied by two little boys with his exact same eyes. This isn't a fairy tale of happily ever afters, but a raw and human story of what happens when the past returns to collect its debt. The price of perfection. Lucas Blackwood was a man the world adored. At 32, he was the CEO of Blackwood Dynamics, a multi-billion-dollar tech empire built on artificial intelligence and cloud innovation. His face graced the covers of magazines, his words were sought at global summits, and his presence could command a room. Every photo of him captured the same polished image. Perfectly styled blonde hair, piercing blue eyes that held just the right amount of cool indifference, and a smile that could close deals before a contract was even read. He lived in a penthouse overlooking the East River, drove a customized electric sports car, and wore suits that cost more than most people's rent. To anyone on the outside, he was impeccable, ambitious, and destined for greatness. But there was one thing Lucas didn't have, and that he had once risked everything for: love. 5 years earlier, before he fully stepped into his CEO role, Lucas had been with someone who didn't fit the blueprint his family had drawn for his life. Her name was Hazel Thorne. She wasn't a socialite or a tech investor. She wasn't born into wealth. She was a graduate student, studying architecture on scholarships and part-time jobs, with paint on her jeans and notebooks full of messy sketches. She had long chestnut hair, expressive blue eyes, and a way of looking at Lucas that made him feel like he was more than his title. With her, he didn't have to perform. With her, he laughed louder, slept better, and dreamed more freely. They'd met at a charity event he had only attended out of obligation. She was helping set up the stage lights, and he'd stumbled into her while checking his phone. It was the most human moment he'd had in months. Their relationship blossomed in private. Long walks through the city, late-night takeout on rooftops, and conversations about dreams and fears. She didn't care about his money. She'd tease him for his expensive watch and refuse to let him pay her rent. She made him feel real in a world where everything about him felt artificial. For the first time in his life, he envisioned a future that didn't revolve around quarterly earnings or board meetings. He imagined a small wedding, a cozy home, children with wild energy and bright blue eyes. He imagined Hazel in every version of that future, but his parents had other plans. When they found out about Hazel, the reaction was immediate and brutal. His father, Arthur Blackwood, chairman of the board and one of the coldest men Lucas had ever known, summoned him to his office and told him point blank, "She isn't your equal. She dilutes your brand. Marry her, and we'll begin the process of removing you from the succession." His mother didn't bother to hide her disdain either. "Do you really want to embarrass the family?" she'd asked. "What will the shareholders think when they see you with someone so average?" Lucas tried to resist. He fought. He told them he didn't care about perception. But Blackwood Dynamics wasn't just a company. It was an empire handed down for 3 generations. His name was a brand. His face was an investment. And as the pressure mounted, from family, from the board, from advisors reminding him of his obligations, Lucas felt the walls closing in. The worst part was that he never told Hazel the truth. One day, he simply ended it. No explanation, no discussion. He said he needed to focus on his career and walked out of her apartment, leaving behind the woman he had once imagined forever with. Hazel called once, then twice, then she stopped. He never answered. He submerged himself in work and tried to convince himself that it had been necessary, that it was for the best. But not a single day went by that he didn't think of her, that he didn't see something that reminded him of the life he'd walked away from. He missed her laugh, the way she said his name when she was angry, the way she made him feel like a man, not a product. Still, he never reached out, because admitting he was wrong would mean confronting everything he had given up. And at the time, Lucas Blackwood didn't know how to face regret. Not yet. The quiet architect of a new life, Hazel Thorne had never believed in fairy tales, but falling in love with Lucas Blackwood had felt dangerously close to one. For a brief time, it had been more than she ever dreamed possible. She remembered the warmth in his eyes when he looked at her, as if she were the only person in the world. She remembered the nights on the rooftop, when the city lights made the sky feel infinite, and Lucas would whisper about wanting to escape the world of cameras and boardrooms, just to live a normal life with her. She believed him. She believed every word, every unfinished promise in the spaces between kisses and silences. But one day, he was gone. No goodbye, no explanation, just a cold, carefully worded message that he needed space to focus on his future. She waited for his call. She tried to find him. She left one long, desperate voicemail, then another. But the silence that followed wasn't empty. It was deliberate. It was final. And so, she stopped waiting. Hazel threw herself into her work, pouring her heartbreak into blueprints and deadlines, trying to get lost in her studies. But only a few weeks later, she started to feel the changes in her body. The fatigue, the nausea, the missed period. She told herself it was stress, but when she took a pregnancy test and saw the result, her breath hitched. She didn't cry. She just stood in the bathroom, staring at the word positive, as if it were written in another language. Then she sat on the edge of her bed and said nothing for a very, very long time. The doctor confirmed her pregnancy, but the ultrasound revealed something she hadn't expected. 2 heartbeats, twins, 2 lives growing inside her, 2 reminders of a man who had walked away without looking back. She considered calling him again. She imagined what she would say, but then she remembered the voicemail, the cold response from his assistant, the way he had disappeared as if she had meant nothing, and she realized she couldn't go through that again. So she didn't call. She didn't write. She deleted his number. She accepted, deep in her soul, that he wasn't coming back. Hazel decided to leave New York. There was no place for her there anymore. She got a job in a smaller city, in a drafting office where no one asked questions about her past. She rented a modest apartment and lived carefully, saving every penny. The twin pregnancy was hard, but she was harder. She worked through swollen feet, sleepless nights, and the fear of being completely alone in the world. She took prenatal vitamins with food stamps. She skipped meals to pay for baby clothes. And when the time came, she gave birth to 2 healthy, beautiful boys, Ethan and Mason. They had blonde hair from the start and the bluest eyes she had ever seen. It was like seeing 2 tiny versions of the man she had once loved. At first, it broke her heart to see him in their faces, but over time that feeling softened into something else, something fiercer. Love. Not for what could have been, but for what was. Her boys were everything. They were wild, loud, messy, and perfect. They were the reason she got out of bed when her body ached and her bank account hit 0. She worked late nights. She took freelance jobs. She took commissions, blueprints for storefronts, coffee shops, even barns, anything that would keep the lights on. She fed her boys, clothed them, kissed their scraped knees, and read them bedtime stories, even when she was too tired to stand. Hazel never spoke Lucas's name, not once. When the boys asked her why they didn't have a daddy, she told them the truth, gently, that sometimes people leave because they're afraid of love, and it's not their fault, or ours either. She didn't speak of revenge. She didn't dwell on the past. She poured all of her energy into raising two kind, curious, and courageous little boys who had no idea they carried a last name that once ruled a city. And yet, late at night, when they were sleeping, she sometimes found herself wondering what Lucas would say if he saw them. Would he recognize them as his? Would he feel anything? Or would he do what he did best, turn away and pretend nothing mattered? She told herself it didn't matter, that she didn't care, that she had built a life without him. And it was true. But fate, as always, had other plans. A fateful encounter. The invitation had arrived unexpectedly, tucked into the inbox of Hazel's modest email, with a generic subject line: Architectural Futures Forum, Speaker Selection. At first, she assumed it was a mistake. She had never presented at any major events, let alone in New York City. But the message was real. They had reviewed her design proposal for a sustainable, low-cost, community-focused women's shelter and wanted her to speak on the panel. It wasn't paid, but they would cover travel and lodging. It was the opportunity she had dreamed of for years, and the kind of recognition she never thought she'd receive as a struggling single mother of two. She hesitated for only a moment. Then she said yes. Returning to New York after 5 years felt surreal. Everything looked the same, but nothing felt familiar. She arrived with Ethan and Mason in tow, two energetic 5-year-olds who asked non-stop questions on the flight, stared wide-eyed at the skyline, and said the buildings looked like giant Lego towers. She dressed them neatly for the forum, in little collared shirts and clean sneakers, and packed a bag full of coloring books and snacks to keep them occupied while she presented. She had no one to watch them, and she wasn't going to let that stop her. They sat patiently near the back of the exhibition space while she stood beside her model of the shelter, her palms slightly sweaty, her heart pounding. The event was held in a downtown skyscraper with glass walls circling the venue, sunlight pouring in. She tried not to think about the possibility of running into anyone she knew. New York was big. He wouldn't be here. Why would he be? Then she heard his voice. She was halfway through answering a reporter's question when it cut through the air, low, confident, and too familiar to ignore. She froze, her stomach twisted before her eyes confirmed it. Lucas Blackwood was less than 20 feet away, laughing softly with a group of sponsors in sleek suits. He hadn't changed. The blonde hair was still perfect, the posture as relaxed as ever, but older now, with harder edges. His expression was placid until it landed on her. Hazel saw the moment it hit him. First confusion, then shock, then something deeper. His eyes drifted past her, to the two little boys sitting on the floor behind her table, coloring quietly on the carpet. Time slowed down. Lucas's face went pale. His gaze locked on the twins, and Hazel could see the gears turning, fast and desperate. She didn't move. She didn't smile. She didn't look away. He walked toward her. She stiffened, gripping the edge of the display table as if it could anchor her to the ground. The people around them seemed to fade into background noise. The city, the forum, the years. It all came down to this impossible moment. He stopped in front of her, his voice barely audible. "Hazel," she didn't answer. He looked back at the boys, then back at her, visibly shaken. "Are they?" She held his gaze. Yes, she said, calm and serene. They're yours. He recoiled, stunned. For a moment, he looked like a man who had just been punched. I didn't know, he said. I had no idea. I know, she replied, her voice steady. I tried. You made sure I couldn't reach you. He blinked, trying to process it all. But why didn't you try again? Hazel laughed softly, a sound that was both bitter and weary. I did. I left messages. I sent letters. Your assistant told me not to call again. I figured you'd made your choice. Lucas looked down, the weight of the realization settling heavily on his face. He turned to look at the boys, who were still unaware of who he was. Ethan looked up, smiled, and waved at him innocently. I need to talk to you, Lucas said, his voice just barely breaking. Hazel crossed her arms. Now you want to talk? After 5 years? At a public event? He hesitated, then nodded slowly. Yes, I need to explain, and I need to understand. She stared at him for a long time. The pain she had buried deep inside her resurfaced, but she didn't let him see it. Not here. Not yet. You can't just walk back in like nothing happened, she said. But if you really want to understand, you can start by learning their names. Lucas looked at her, and something broke open in his eyes. He turned to the boys, knelt down, and asked softly, "What are your names?" The twins stared at him, puzzled, but curious. "I'm Ethan," one said. "I'm Mason," the other added. "What's your name?" Lucas smiled sadly. "I'm Lucas." They didn't recognize him. Why would they? Hazel watched from behind the table, her heart pounding. This wasn't the moment she had prepared for. She never thought it would come. And yet, here they were. Not as strangers. Not yet as a family. But something had begun to shift. The truth had finally come to light, and nothing would ever be the same again. Lucas didn't sleep that night. After the forum, after the longest and most jarring day of his life, he returned to his apartment, a place that once felt like the pinnacle of success and now felt empty, devoid of meaning. The image of the two boys lingered in his mind, haunting and vivid. Ethan and Mason. Their names echoed in his thoughts like a mantra he never knew he needed. He could still see their eyes, so familiar it ached in his chest, and the way they had looked at him without recognition. They didn't know him. They didn't know he existed. And that realization, more than anything, broke him. The next morning, he arranged for a private DNA test. He didn't tell anyone. Not his assistant, not his legal team, not his parents. This wasn't about legality. It was about something he couldn't name, something urgent and personal, as if he needed permission to believe the truth, even though every part of him already knew. The results came 3 days later. 99.9% match. There was no denying it. He was their father. Lucas stared at the document in silence for a long time. Then he folded it carefully and placed it in a drawer, as if it were something sacred and heavy. Not a piece of paper, but a door that had just opened. A door he had unknowingly locked from the outside 5 years ago. He contacted Hazel through the event coordinator, not wanting to push too hard. She agreed to meet him. Once, at a small coffee shop in the Lower East Side. No lawyers, no assistants, just them. She arrived with her usual quiet strength, dressed simply, her hair pulled back. She looked tired, but serene, and more beautiful than he remembered. Life had shaped her in new ways, adding a gravity to her gaze that wasn't there before. He stood up as she walked in. She didn't smile. They sat across from each other, two people with years of pain between them, and two children who had unknowingly connected them forever. For a long moment, they said nothing. The hum of the coffee shop buzzed around them. Clinking cups, steaming milk, quiet conversations. "I got the results," Lucas said finally. "They're mine." Hazel nodded. "I know." He ran a hand through his hair, struggling to find words that meant enough. "I don't know what to say to you." She looked at him with clear eyes. "Then don't say anything you don't mean." "I mean it now," he said. "Just, Hazel, I didn't know. I swear to you, I didn't know." "I believe you," she said. "But that doesn't erase what happened." He looked down, shame washing over him. "I wanted to fight for you. I was going to. But my parents, the board, it all came crashing down. I didn't know how to be the man they expected and the man you needed." "You chose them," she said, without malice. "You walked away." He nodded slowly. "Yes, and I had to raise them without you," she continued. "While you were building empires, I was building cribs. While you were giving speeches, I was trying to find enough for dinner." Lucas flinched. Her words weren't cruel. They were just true, and they hit harder than he could have anticipated. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," he said. "Not yet. I just want a chance. To know them. To be a part of their lives, however small. Even if it's—" He paused, his voice faltering. "They don't know you. Oh, they don't even know what a father is. To them, I am their whole world." "I don't want to take anything from you," he said quickly. "I just want to add to what you've built." Hazel exhaled slowly. "They're 5. They don't understand betrayal or loyalty, but they understand presence. You can't just be in and out. You can't start and stop. If you want to be in their lives, it has to be for good." "I'm in," he said without hesitation. "Whatever it takes." She nodded, still guarded, but something in her posture softened. "Then you'll start small. Pick them up from school one day. Come to the park. Sit with them. Let them come to you. If they ask you questions, answer them honestly. If they run from you, don't chase. Just be there." Lucas nodded, humbled. "Okay, I can do that." Leaving the coffee shop, there were no hugs or promises, just an understanding, a fragile agreement between two people who were no longer in love, but were forever connected. Hazel walked ahead, and Lucas followed at a respectful distance. Not as a couple, not yet as a father, but as a man finally trying to make right what had once gone so terribly wrong. Lucas's first visit to the boys' school was nothing like the corporate events he was used to. There were no sleek suits, no rehearsed speeches, no executives to impress. Instead, there were sticky handprints on the classroom walls, paper airplanes flying down the hallway, and the unmistakable chaos of 20 small children navigating their small universes. Lucas stood near the school door in a casual sweater and jeans, awkward and unsure of where to put his hands. He'd reviewed multi-billion-dollar acquisitions in boardrooms without breaking a sweat. But waiting to pick up his children who didn't even know they were his, made him feel like a nervous teenager. Hazel had arranged it carefully. She told the boys a friend was picking them up to take them to the park. No labels, no explanations, just a chance for them to meet him on neutral ground. When Ethan and Mason came bounding out of the school doors, Lucas recognized them instantly. Their blonde hair was bright in the sunlight, and their identical blue eyes lit up when they saw him, though they didn't fully understand who he was. He knelt down, unsure of the script. "Hey, I'm Lucas. Your mom asked me to take you to the park today. Is that okay?" The boys looked at each other, then back at him. Ethan tilted his head. "Are you the man from the building with all the people in suits?" Lucas smiled. "Yeah, that was me." Mason squinted. "Do you have snacks?" Lucas laughed. "Yes, lots." That was enough. They took his hands without hesitation and led him away, chattering about dinosaurs and spaceships and how Ethan's teacher had said Pluto wasn't a planet anymore, which he found totally unfair. Lucas listened to it all, responding when he could, but mostly just absorbing them. Their voices, their expressions, their absolute, unfiltered joy. It was overwhelming in the best possible way. At the park, they ran toward the swings, and Lucas sat on a nearby bench, just watching them. For a few minutes, he let himself pretend that this had always been his life, that he had always been there for them, on days like this, in moments like this. But that illusion cracked when Mason fell off the slide and bumped his elbow. He didn't cry right away. He just stood there, eyes wide and glassy, trying to decide if the pain was worth the tears. Lucas ran over without thinking, kneeling down and gently checking his arm. "You're okay," he said softly. "It's not bleeding, just a bump." Mason blinked. "You sound like Mommy." Lucas paused. Then he said quietly, "I'm trying to be good at this." Mason leaned into him, just for a second, and that small gesture nearly broke Lucas in two. He looked up and saw Ethan standing nearby, watching him intently. There was something calculating in his gaze, not suspicion exactly, but a quiet evaluation. Lucas knew that look. He'd worn it himself long ago, when trying to decide if someone was safe. Ethan finally walked over. "Are you going to come back?" Lucas met his eyes, his gaze steady. "Yes, I'm coming back." Ethan nodded once as if satisfied. Then he ran off again, calling for Mason to chase him. Lucas stayed there for a moment longer, trying to catch his breath. That one question, "Are you going to come back?" had felt heavier than any contract he had ever signed. But his answer had been true. He would come back, again and again. The visits continued, quietly and consistently. Lucas showed up for school pickups, at the park, at classmate birthday parties he didn't know. He learned what juice boxes they hated, what superhero was in at the moment, and how to break them up when they fought over the same Lego piece. He learned to kneel down and really listen, to put away his phone, to just be there. Over time, the boys grew used to him. They laughed more. They called him by his name with a little more familiarity. Ethan started asking questions. "Did you know my mommy when she was young? Do you live in a really big house? Why don't you have any kids?" Lucas answered honestly, carefully. He never rushed them. He never tried to earn something they weren't ready to give. One afternoon, as he was walking them back to Hazel's apartment, Mason took his hand without being asked. Ethan did the same, then looked up and asked, "Why do you always smile when we talk?" Lucas looked at both of them, their cheeks flushed from running, their matching backpacks bouncing with every step. "Because I'm lucky," he said simply. "I get to be here with you." Hazel was waiting at the door, her arms crossed. Unsure. She always watched him closely after each visit, as if trying to gauge if he had earned another one. But this time, something shifted. She saw the boys run inside, laughing, telling her about the swings and how Lucas almost fell trying to race them. And then she looked at him. "You didn't leave today," she said in a low voice. "You stayed even when Mason got scared. You stayed even when Ethan got quiet." Lucas nodded. "I told them I would." Hazel looked down. Then she looked back at him. "Keep doing that." And just like that, without grand gestures or emotional speeches, the wall between them lowered. It didn't go away completely, but it became thinner. And Lucas knew that this wasn't about being forgiven in one moment. It was about showing up in hundreds of them, and he would, always. Lucas didn't expect the word to come so soon. It had been nearly 3 months since he started seeing Ethan and Mason regularly. He never missed a visit. He was never late. He learned to sit in silence when they were in a bad mood, to get down on the floor when they asked for help with puzzles, and to listen when they just needed to talk, even if what they were saying made little sense. He was careful not to push too fast. He had come to terms with the fact that, for now, he was just Lucas, the man who brought good snacks, played tag without checking his phone, and laughed at their jokes, even when they made no sense. But something had changed. It was a Saturday afternoon. Hazel had an interview for a new design contract and asked Lucas if he could watch the boys for a few hours. He agreed immediately, and she dropped them off at his apartment, which he had recently kid-proofed despite never thinking he would need to. Toys now lived in woven baskets in the living room. A small table with crayons and construction paper stood by the window. The fridge was stocked with juice boxes, string cheese, and the kind of cereal that came with marshmallows that he didn't approve of, but bought anyway, because they loved it. That afternoon, they built an elaborate pillow fort between the couches, with tunnels and a command center made of old shoe boxes and flashlights. Ethan declared himself captain. Mason insisted on being the science officer because he'd brought a magnifying glass. Lucas played along as Commander Dad, a name Mason made up halfway through their game, and said without thinking. Lucas froze for a second, startled by the word. Dad. He didn't respond immediately, afraid that if he reacted too much, Mason would take it back. So he just smiled and played along. But inside, he was a whirlwind of emotion. The word kept echoing in his mind. He hadn't earned it yet. Or maybe he had. Little by little. In pieces. Not through grand gestures, but through consistency, time, and quiet love. Later that evening, after they had eaten takeout for dinner and were lying down under the still-standing pillow fort watching a cartoon, Mason snuggled up next to him and looked at him. Can I call you Dad now, or do I have to wait? Lucas felt his throat tighten. He looked at Mason's serious little face, then over at Ethan, who was also watching, quietly holding his favorite stuffed dinosaur. Lucas reached over and hugged them both close. You can call me whatever you feel like, he said, his voice thick. But if you want to call me Dad, I would be very proud of that. Mason nodded. Ethan gave him a small smile, the kind that said more than words. That night, Hazel came to pick them up. She found them asleep on the couch. Mason nestled on Lucas's chest. Ethan curled up beside him, both of them snoring softly. Lucas had fallen asleep too, his arm protectively around them, the television still humming quietly in the background. She didn't wake them right away. She just stood there for a long moment, just watching. Something inside of her, something that had been locked up, started to shift. She saw how Lucas held them as they slept, as if they had always been there. She saw how safe they looked, how peaceful. When she finally did wake him, Lucas moved slowly, blinking as he realized where he was and what time it was. I'm so sorry, he whispered. We must have all fallen asleep. Hazel shook her head. They were happy. That's what matters. As she gently lifted the boys and helped carry them to the car, he looked at her. Mason called me Dad today, he said in a low voice. He asked if it was okay. Hazel didn't speak right away. Then she looked at him and said, he wouldn't have asked if he didn't already feel it. The ride home was quiet. Lucas rode in the back seat with the boys, holding their hands as they slept. Hazel watched through the rearview mirror, and something inside her settled for the first time in a very long time. The walls she had built to protect herself, walls that were understandable and necessary, began to come down. Not all at once, but piece by piece. That night, Lucas couldn't sleep. He lay awake in his apartment, staring at the ceiling, thinking about the way Mason had looked when he said the word. Dad wasn't a title that could be claimed. It had to be given, earned, and now it had been. In the stillness of that night, for the first time in years, Lucas felt whole. Not because of success or wealth or reputation, but because two little boys had chosen to let him in. Not as a guest, not as a visitor, but as their father. Lucas hadn't planned to confront his parents. He had avoided it for months, pushing down the urgency whenever it swelled in him, focusing instead on showing up for Ethan and Mason, on earning Hazel's cautious trust, on building something genuine from the pieces of the life he had once destroyed. But there came a point where the silence no longer felt like strength. It felt like surrender. The deeper he got into fatherhood, the more he saw what he had almost lost forever, and the more unbearable it became to know that his parents had stolen it from him with a smile and a firm handshake. He had to face them, not for closure, but for clarity. He needed them to see what they had done, and more importantly, what he would never let them do again. He arrived at the Blackwood estate on a crisp Sunday morning. It was exactly as he remembered it, impeccably landscaped, cold, and silent. A place designed for appearances, not comfort. His father met him in the library, sitting in the same leather chair where so many past conversations had been framed as lectures. His mother appeared moments later, immaculate as ever, her expression unreadable. "I'm surprised you came," his father said, lacing his hands together. "We didn't think we'd hear from you again." Lucas didn't sit. He stood near the fireplace, his posture quiet but unyielding. "We need to talk. About Hazel. About the boys." His mother stiffened at the mention of her. "We warned you about her years ago." Lucas turned to her, his voice sharp but controlled. "You didn't warn me. You lied to me. You blocked letters. You ignored calls. You told people to keep her away from me." His father's eyes narrowed. "We did what was necessary to protect your future. You were emotional, focused. You would have thrown away your entire legacy for a girl who had nothing." Lucas took a deep breath, the fury rising in his chest. "That girl is the mother of my children. Children you didn't even bother to know existed. She raised them alone, with nothing, and they turned out better than anything this family has ever produced." His mother rose, her voice cutting. "Don't be dramatic. Do you think we haven't sacrificed for you? For this name? Your success?" "My success," Lucas interrupted, "doesn't have anything to do with this name anymore. The company, the image, the money, none of it matters if it costs me the humanity. You tried to make me choose between love and legacy, and I listened. I walked away from the only real thing I had, but I will not make that mistake again." There was a heavy silence. His father leaned back, his tone suddenly colder, more strategic. "And now what? You're going to play house with a woman and pretend you're a family man? Do you think the world will buy that?" Lucas looked at him, disgusted. "I don't care what the world buys. I care what Ethan and Mason see when they look at me. I care what kind of man I am when I tuck them into bed at night. And I care about the woman who carried that weight when I left." His mother opened her mouth, but he didn't let her speak. "I'm not here for your blessing. I'm here to tell you that your control ends here. If you can't accept my family, you won't be a part of our lives. That is your choice. But I am done living under your version of success." They didn't answer immediately. There was a crack in the room, a visible fracture in the illusion of power they had always held over him. For the first time, Lucas wasn't the boy seeking approval. He was the man drawing the line. "I pity you," he added quietly. "You'll never know them. You'll never get to hear Ethan explain how he thinks the moon controls feelings, or see the way Mason draws his dreams. You'll miss it all, and one day you'll realize you traded your grandchildren for control. He turned and walked out, leaving them in their perfect, empty house. When he returned to his apartment, Hazel and the boys were waiting for him. She looked up as he came in, reading his face instantly. "You told them?" she said. He nodded. "Everything? And?" "They didn't take it well." Hazel walked over. "Do you regret it?" Lucas looked at his sons, who were building block towers on the floor, their laughter echoing through the room. "Not for a second," he said. That night, after the boys were in bed, Hazel handed him a small box. Inside was a photograph, one she had taken weeks earlier, when he wasn't looking. He was sitting on the grass at the park, Mason in his lap, Ethan curled up beside him, all three of them laughing. She had printed it and framed it. A silent gesture. A thank you. A beginning. Lucas held the photo for a long time before he placed it on the bookshelf next to the boys' art projects. He no longer needed validation from anyone but them, his family, his future, the life he chose, finally, on his own terms. The autumn of their lives. Autumn in the city had a way of softening everything. The sharp angles of the buildings blurred under the golden light. The noise of traffic seemed quieter, and even the wind carried a kind of stillness. For Lucas, the change in seasons mirrored what was happening inside him. Something that had been cold for a long time had begun to thaw, and in its place was a warmth he once feared he didn't deserve. It had been nearly a year since he found out about Ethan and Mason, and every day since had been a choice. He had chosen them. He had chosen Hazel. He had chosen to show up again and again, not as the perfect man, but as a present one. Life wasn't seamless, but it was full. His mornings began with spilled cereal, mismatched socks, and the chaos of getting 2 5-year-olds out the door. His nights ended with bedtime stories and small hands tucked into his shirt as they fell asleep beside him. His apartment had long since transformed from a sleek, lifeless bachelor pad to a warm, lived-in home where finger paintings covered the walls and little sewed sneakers were always left by the door. The boys called him Dad now, without hesitation, sometimes with excitement, sometimes with frustration, sometimes in whispers when they needed comfort. And each time, it still hit him with the quiet force of a wonder. Hazel had softened too. Not completely. There were still moments when the weight of their history made her withdraw a little. But those moments were fewer now, and always followed by something small, but meaningful. A look, a hand on his back, an unfinished but understood sentence. They had rebuilt trust, not through dramatic apologies or grand gestures, but through the simple rhythm of shared responsibility and mutual care. He respected her more than ever, not just for raising the boys alone, but for doing it without letting her pain turn to bitterness. She had every reason to shut him out for good, but she hadn't. And that forgiveness, unspoken but felt, was the greatest gift he had ever been given. One Saturday morning, as the boys played in the living room and Hazel made coffee in the kitchen, Lucas stood by the window with a small box in his hand. It wasn't velvet or branded. It was simple, clean, and thoughtfully chosen. Inside was a ring, delicate but strong. He had spent months thinking about how to ask. At first, he imagined something big. Roses, photographers, a sweeping gesture with the skyline behind them. But that wasn't their story. Their story had been rebuilt in quiet hours, in soft apologies, in hallways littered with Legos and notes signed in crayon. He didn't need fireworks. He needed the truth. He walked into the kitchen and waited for her to look up. She raised an eyebrow at the seriousness of his face. "What's wrong?" she asked. "Nothing," he said. "That's the point." He took her hand and led her into the living room where the boys were still playing. They looked up, curious but not surprised. Lucas knelt down, and for a moment, everything around them faded into a hush. "I don't want to rewrite the past," he said. "I just want to write the rest of the story with you, as your partner, as the father of our children, as the man who finally understands what it means to love fully and show up completely." Hazel's eyes glistened, but she didn't cry. She was too strong for that. She smiled, at first small, then wider, and nodded. "Yes," she said simply, "because I don't need perfection. I just need you." The boys cheered, not entirely sure what had just happened, but sensing it was a good thing. They piled into his arms, toppling him over until they all fell into a laughing heap on the rug. The wedding came a few months later. It wasn't extravagant. It didn't need to be. They held it in the small community garden that Hazel had helped design years ago. Friends gathered, close and quiet, sitting among rows of late-season marigolds and ivy-covered fences. The boys wore matching vests and carried the rings, too excited to walk slowly down the aisle. Hazel wore a simple ivory dress, her hair down, a single daisy tucked behind one ear. Lucas couldn't stop smiling as she walked toward him, her steps steady, her eyes fixed on his. There were no speeches about fate, no quotes from poems, just vows spoken from the heart, short, honest, and unpolished. Promises to choose each other, not just on the good days, but on the hard ones too. Promises to parent as a team, to make mistakes and forgive them, to hold each other accountable and hold each other close. When they kissed, it wasn't the kind of kiss that marked a beginning. It was the kind that sealed something already built, slowly, painfully, beautifully. Afterward, as the sun set and the garden glowed with a golden light, Ethan and Mason ran through the grass, shrieking with delight. Lucas watched them, his hand wrapped in Hazel's, his chest filled with a peace he had never known in his old life of boardrooms and silence. He once believed that success meant power, image, control. But standing there, barefoot in a garden with the love of his life beside him, and his children chasing butterflies in front of him, he finally understood what it truly meant. He was home. Completely. Finally. And this time, he wasn't going anywhere. What lesson did Lucas learn that no amount of money could teach him? And what do you think Hazel's final act of forgiveness truly meant? This story's ending is not just satisfying. It's quietly powerful. It doesn't hinge on an over-the-top redemption or a fairy tale perfection, but on the slow, human work of rebuilding. Lucas's transformation isn't instantaneous. It is earned. Step by painful step, through presence, humility, and the willingness to face what he once ran from. That's what makes it meaningful. Hazel's strength is the emotional backbone of the story. She never needed to be saved. She needed respect, consistency, and truth. And in the end, she got all of it. Not because she forgave easily, but because she knew her worth. The love they rediscover is not naive or romanticized. It is mature, layered with pain and healing, and stronger because of what they have survived. The final image, a family built on love, choice, and second chances, isn't just beautiful. It's hopeful. It reminds us that broken things aren't always lost. Sometimes, they're just waiting to be rebuilt, one honest brick at a time.